What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about Amazing Fantasy 15. There was a really interesting set of sales this weekend, so we're going to talk about the difference between a universal copy, a restored copy, and a pence copy. Which one was the best buy? Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. This was a really interesting set of sales that came up this weekend in the weekly Heritage Comic Auction. I thought it would be fun to talk about, see which of these books you saw in the thumbnail was the best deal. So there were 3 Amazing Fantasy 15s that came up for sale in this week's Heritage Auction. All of them the exact same grade, but they were all different types. You had a cents universal copy, so a 12-cent copy. You had a cents restored copy, so it was a C1 restoration, small amount of glue on the spine. And then you had a universal pence copy. So this is one of the copies that was printed for distribution in England and the UK and has the pence price instead of the cents price. So most people might say, well, of course, the best one to buy is the cents copy. But what we're talking about here, at least for me for this video, isn't necessarily the one that you want the most. Which one of these 3 ended up being the best value? Why did they sell where they sold? And did it make sense? So the first one that we're going to talk about here is the 2.0 universal cents copy. So this copy sold for $28,800. This is a really nice looking 2.0. Obviously I'll have a picture of it up over here. It is a really nice looking 2.0. I always think it's funny when I talk about Amazing Fantasy 15, whenever there's a low sale for a book or a sale that people perceive as a low, there's always comments where people are like, oh, it sold for that because of this or because of this. It's always something that's wrong with the book or whatever it is. It's this inherent defense of this book that's out there. I think it's really interesting whenever I talk about Amazing Fantasy 15. But this one is very nice. This is you can't ask for much of a better looking 2.0. It was an off-white copy. There was almost no marble chipping. You could effectively say there was no marble chipping, which is a really hard thing to get, especially with a low grade copy of this book. This one presents much better than a 2.0. I would say it presents more like a 3.5 or a 4. And if it didn't have that little piece out on the bottom near the spine, even better than that. And so this one looks really nice. Most of the damage is relegated to the spine of this book. Now the record for a 2.0 universal copy was $38,400, and this one that sold looks nicer. so this book sold for $9,600 less than the record, 25% less than the record, and it's a nice looking copy. The only thing that I would say is better about that other copy is the colors were a little deeper, but that one had definite chipping and creasing and all this kind of stuff. Now, regardless, I felt like this was a pretty strong sale based on where I thought this book would sell. I had estimated the price of this book at $25,000. It beat my estimate by 15%. Now, why did I estimate it at $25,000? Well, in most grades, because we haven't had a copy in this grade sell for a few months, we've had copies in other grades. In recent sales for Amazing Fantasy 15, most grades have been selling between around 10 and 11,000, in some cases even less than 10,000 per point. And so when I say that, I mean if it was a 3.0 selling for 30,000, 4.0 selling for 40,000, that type of thing, that's 10,000 per point. And I've seen some that are getting down below 10, but generally around 11,000 per point is about where they've been selling. And so this one, it's a 2.0. Why did I say 25,000 instead of like 22 or 20? There's a really interesting phenomenon that you sometimes see with really big keys, where as you get lower and lower in the grade, they actually sell for more per point than as you go up, it sells for less, and then as you go up even more, it sells for more per point again. And it's just because you have this so much demand for the lower grade copies that there's a lot of competition down at that lower end to get it where it's even somewhat affordable, and so it ends up boosting the price per point for this book. This one's selling for much more per point than you get at kind of the lower mid grades. And so I think actually something that's interesting with that, if you're wondering where the best value is for this book right now, it really seems like it's at about a 3.5 to a 4.5. You're getting sales in the $35,000 to $40,000 range there, and that's less than $10,000 per point, whereas this book, a 2.0, sold for $14,400 per point. And so if you can add a little money to what you're spending on this book, you have a pretty good chance at getting a nice copy for a pretty good value. But we're getting outside the point of this video a little bit with that, but if you're looking at Amazing Fantasy 15, where the value is, it seems like kind of that lower mid grades, around 3.5 to a 4. Now, this book was graded on July 7th of 2022. Has a lot going on in the grader's notes, but like I said, it does look nice. So it has a spine split on the bottom of the spine, a spine split on the top of the spine. The top staple is detached. A tear on the bottom of the back cover, heavy crease on the left bottom of the back cover, moderate creasing to cover, moderate wear to spine. Small piece out of right center of back cover, staining to cover, staple tears, tears to cover, and wear on all corners. So yeah, there's a lot going on there in terms of the notes, but most of it is really relegated to the spine and the back cover. So you get this really nice presenting copy at a 2.0. So like I said, this one sold for $14,400 per point. Now let's look at the restored copy. So here we've got the restored copy of Amazing Fantasy 15. You can see if I switched it over, on the image right over there, you can see this one is brighter. This is so I was saying where the colors on the other one were a little more muted, whereas the colors on this one is a little brighter. But I would say this copy isn't as nice as the first one. It's not as clean overall as the first one. Now this one is a restored C1. It has a small amount of glue on the spine. C means it's amateur, 1 means there's a small amount. But don't let the 1 fool you. Sometimes that 1 can be quite a bit before it moves up to a 2. Now this one sold for $19,200 or $9,600 per point. Now there are a couple interesting things about this copy. The first one is that the notes don't say anything about the staples on the top or bottom being detached. And that's usually the reason that glue would be on the spine, that somebody has reattached the cover with glue because the staples were detached. It also the notes don't say anything about cover reattached with glue. It just says small amount of glue on spine. Now, do I want to trust that CGC made sure to state that? That's a risky gamble, but that could be the goal of the person who bought this, that they said, okay, it doesn't say that the staples are detached. You can see the top staple. It looks like it might be attached still to the book, and so they think maybe they can get the glue removed, and then they can have a book that has an attached cover and get a blue label again. Now, this one does have deeper colors. It has no marble chipping as well, which again, that's something that you can see with all 3 of these books if you were looking at the thumbnail. None of them really have any marble chipping, which is rare for this low grade of an Amazing Fantasy 15. There is definitely more creasing on this cover, and there's that chip out of the top, more obvious spine wear, just some more general wear to the front cover of this book. But this one felt like a very strong sale to me at $19,200. The way that I like to price restored books, especially if it's one that has a shot at getting back to a universal grade, meaning that the restoration could be removed, you could have it resubmitted and get a blue label, which this one theoretically is to estimate what I think the grade would be after it was turned back into a blue label, take the cost of the restoration removal, the cost of the regrading, subtract that from that new grade, and then you've got the estimated value of the restored book. That's just how I like to do it. I don't like to go just based straight on some percentage of value, because I think that's the calculation I think most people are going to be making if they're really looking to buy a book for restoration removal, is what's it going to cost to have it taken out, what's it going to cost for the regrading, and what grade do I think I can get afterwards. Now, I estimated that even though it didn't say that it was detached at those staples, that I estimated that if this glue was removed, that cover was going to be detached. And so I thought it would safely remain at a 1.5. And a 1.5 peaked at $22,800 in February. That's around when a lot of these Amazing Fantasy 15s were peaking. So I estimated a drop in value of 20% from that sale, which would put it today around $18,000, which if you look at the sales in a 1.0, 1.5, that kind of thing, it seems pretty reasonable. Now, I estimated the cost of restoration removal at about $500, cost of regrading at $600. So the total value would be $18,000 minus $500 minus $600, which gets us to $16,900. So we'll just say $17,000 to use a round number. So this book sold for $19,200. That's $2,200 or 13% more than what I had estimated the price of this book as. I think this person who bought the book is likely planning to try to have that restoration removed. They see that small amount of glue, and they think that's one I have a decent shot at getting it removed, and they're hoping maybe they can retain that 2.0, maybe they can get a 1.8. In that case, they're in decent shape, but if not, if they get the 1.5, they're already in the red, and they haven't spent any money yet on restoration removal and regrading. And it's also possible that there is enough glue on that spine that you can't even remove it without just wrecking the book. And so that's also a very real possibility. There are definitely times when somebody will buy a book, hope for restoration removal, and then realize it's just not possible, or if you do have it removed, it will cause way too much damage to be worth it. So I was talking about the grader's notes. So here's the grader's notes. Spine split on bottom of spine split on center of spine, tape on top of spine, moderate creasing to cover, moderate tears to cover, moderate wear to spine, small amount of glue on interior spine, wear to all corners of the cover. So again, a lot of stuff going on this book. I mean, it's a 2.0, what do you want? But this one, I think there is a very real possibility that a 1.5 is where it gets to, but I imagine the person that purchased this book was thinking, and hopefully I can get this thing to stay at a 2.0, then they're doing real well after the removal and the regrading. 1.8, doing okay, but if it ends up a 1.5 or lower, then not doing so well. Now the third copy was a Pence copy. And so if you're not familiar with the Pence copies, they are the exact same book as the Sense copies, same interior, same cover, everything except that the price says 9D up in the little circle in the corner instead of 12 and then the cent sign. So this one is a universal copy, sold for $18,000. It was the lowest price of all of them, $9,000 per point. And this one, you can actually see, has the best colors of all three. When you compare them all next to each other, the colors are the brightest on this copy. And that's actually something you will often see with Pence copies. There's been speculation that the Pence copies were actually printed first, and that's why they often have the best, brightest colors. And I'll say, from the Pence copies of these earlier Marvel books that I've had, their colors have always been amazing. They really have been incredible. And so I don't know if that's the reason why, but I will say the Pence copies always look really, really nice. Now, again, this is a decent looking 2.0. I wouldn't say it's quite as nice as the one right before it. And just in terms of appearance, definitely to me not as nice as the first one, but it all depends what you're looking for in the book. I like the clean look of the first one. Some people might want the brighter colors and are willing to accept some additional flaws. Like I said, this one has deeper colors, but it, again, doesn't have any Marvel chipping, which is really surprising. It has more creasing and more obvious spine wear. Now, this book sold exactly where I estimated it. I estimated this book would sell for $18,000, sold for $18,000. Now, estimating the sales price of these UK or Pence copies isn't really straightforward. It's kind of a hand-wavy process because they just don't sell all that often. Now, some people just say they sell for 60% of value. It's a general rule of thumb. But what I decided to do with this one is I went and looked at the last time a Pence copy sold and compared it to the price of the Sense copy for the same grade. And so in a 2.0, last time was 2017, a Pence copy sold for $8,611. At the same time, the Sense copies were going for around $12,000. That is about 72% of value. And I checked a few different books, and on average, I was seeing them sell between around 70 and 75% of value. And so that didn't seem too far off. I said, okay. So then what I did was I took my estimate for the 2.0 Universal, which was $25,000, multiplied it by 72%, and I got $18,000, or right around $18,000. It's like $17,999 something, but about $18,000. So yeah, it's a bit hand wavy, but it gets you about there. And with this one, it just happened to be that is exactly what that book sold for. Now, this one had much less in terms of graders' notes. Oh, I forgot to mention, the thing that was really interesting was the last Amazing Fantasy 15 that had the restored copy, it graded on the exact same day as the first one. And so I'm wondering if maybe they were sent in together. This one was not graded on the same day. This one was graded on October 4th of 2021. So the other two were graded on July 7th of this year, so very recently. This one was graded about a year ago. And the only notes for this one are heavy creasing to cover and multiple tear to cover. So much simpler notes for this book, but now let's talk about which one seemed like it was the best buy. So we had all three AF-15 sell, all three in the same grade, all right next to each other. It was one after the other after the other. And so this is about as good of a case as you can get for seeing what people really want with these different books. So the Sense copy sold for the most, $28,800. The Sense Restored copy sold for the second most, $19,200. And then the Pence copy sold for the least at $18,000. So which one was the best buy? And one thing I also want to point out is just remember, just a couple years ago, a 2.0 was going for around $14,000. It had a decent range. You could have some pretty big ranges in the year for that book, but around $14,000. So I would be a little cautious still with Amazing Fantasy 15, depending on the grade. Some grades have come down a lot. Those ones that are down around 10,000 per point, I think are looking pretty attractive right now to pick up, but this one at around 14,000, 15,000 per point still feels a little steep to me. I could see it getting down to that $20,000 mark again in a 2.0. So just something to watch. But I personally think the best purchase that was made here, and I'm talking about value that someone's getting from the book, not necessarily the book that you personally want. I think the best purchase was the Pence copy. It sold right around where I was estimating, great colors, no chipping, yeah, it has some creasing and that kind of stuff. But this sale, at least compared to the Universal, which sold for $28,800, was 63% of that value, whereas historically, at least looking at other ones, they've been selling for 70 to 75%. So I think this person probably got a good value on that book. I think the next best purchase was the Universal Sense copy. This was definitely the highest. It was the most paid for it. I think that it was probably on the high side right now based on pricing of other grades for this book. But getting a copy that looks kind of, I'd say like a 354 because the damage is relegated to the spine, I can understand making that purchase because you didn't have to spend the $40,000 or so that it might take to get a book that looks like that. You got it for $28,800, and so I understand, but I do think prices are going to continue to come down or remain flat for a while. So just something to be aware with that. Now, I think the worst purchase or the riskiest purchase was the restored copy. Now, it has the potential for a good return. I mean, I understand the kind of the gambling roll in the dice on a restored copy kind of thing. If it came back a 1.8 or a 2.0 Universal, it is a great purchase, but it also has a pretty decent chance at a loss in the immediate near term. I mean, obviously, this book tends to trend up long term. You can hold on to the book even if you take a loss, and it will likely get up to that value, but with small amount, if you've seen enough small amount restored books from CGC, small amount can literally mean a very small amount. It could just be a dab of glue, or it could be a pretty substantial amount. And so you have to kind of see what happens when you get the book in hand to see what it's going to take to have that removed, how much impact it's going to have on the book to see if it's worth it. And then if you've cracked it out at that point, you probably need to resubmit it anyway just for resale, even if you're not going to have it removed. So you've got other costs already sunk into it, and then you still have the restored label. So I think there's a lot of risk with that restored book. I think that one probably just a little too much was paid for that book. But that's just my opinion on it. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think the best buy was of these three? Would you ever consider a Pence copy? Like I said, I've had a few Pence copies of books over the years, and they always look really, really nice. And the only difference is that little price. But would you consider purchasing a Pence copy? And then the last thing I think that's an interesting topic that a lot of people like to talk about is, should Pence copies sell for more? Because they are much more rare than their Sense counterparts. And when you're talking about things like price variance, when it's a price variant that has dollars or cents on the cover, like the Australian ones, the Canadian ones, those sell generally for big premiums over the US cents copies. So it's always been really interesting that you get that, and it's just because people still see the dollar sign or the cent sign that those ones sell for more. But then with this, when it's probably even more rare on average than those other ones, it sells for about 60 to 70% of value, just because people don't like seeing that 9D, or it changes over time what's in that corner, but seeing the 9D there instead of the cents. So let me know, what do you think about the valuing for those pence copies too? So I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought this was a really interesting one to talk about because you just don't get the opportunity to see books that are this similar selling right next to each other in the same auction. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.